they decided to do kind of like a fake relationship of sorts, even though there's not really a good reason. Like, they're not trying to prove to anyone, like, oh, she's with someone so that people will stop asking her out. Like, there's not really a good reason why they do this. They just do this a lot. Like, as far as, like, constantly... Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some disappointments from this year. So we are here to talk very self-explanatory about the books that kind of disappointed me this year. This is the closest I really ever get to like worst books of the year, because I don't really have many books. Like, the lowest rating that I usually give out is a 3-star. It's very rare that things go below a 3-star. So, and like, those are still pretty decent ratings. It's like middle ground. So like, I wouldn't consider any of these books like outright hated, but there's definitely some books that were disappointments. So I've gathered a list of 10 here, and I thought we could go through them. We'll have a happier note next video. We'll talk about surprises next video. But for this one, let's just get through the ones I did like. So I'll leave a link to my wrap-up playlist down below if you'd like to check out any of these specifically. I don't actually remember what month they were in, but they were over the course of this year, so if you want to like dive into those, feel free to. But yes, I've got 10 to talk about, so let's dive in. The first one is one that I finished relatively recently, and that is The Atlas Six by Livy Blake. This I read in November, and it was part of my experiment to see if I liked dark academia, and the jury's still out on that. It's leaning towards no, but it's not official yet, you know? This one I read, and this is a weird one because it suffered from the fact that everything about this book sounded interesting. The plot sounded interesting. The characters sounded interesting. When I was reading it, the idea of this book sounded interesting, but the execution fell so flat for me, and I didn't like how a lot of it worked. So I picked this up because actually from Frolic Fiction, she and I have relatively similar opinions. Now that I'm diving more into what I think we have very similar opinions about very specific things, and she's huge into dark academia, and I'm still trying to figure out whether or not that's a thing for me. So I picked this one up. I'd heard great things. It's about 6 people who are all vying for 5 spots in this society called the Alexandrian Society. It takes place in a world where there are people who have magical powers, and everyone who's part of this Alexandrian Society has a magical power, and it's presented as a competition of sorts of these people vying, like I said, for 5 spots. So one person's not going to make it into the society, and it's very much told like it's going to be a competition, whereas a lot of this is just they have a year before they decide which of the 5 are going to stay, and it's just like they're studying. And so they have times where they are all studying together, and then they have times where they all branch out and do kind of like independent studies of sorts into very specific things, and they're not really monitored for their time, so they can search whatever they want. What I did like about this book is that it was very theoretical, and the way that it was presented, because a lot of the situations are very confusing. I'm not really sure about what happened most of the time, and I was really bored a lot of the time. So this could work for some people. It just didn't work for me. It was very higher learning, which is fine. I don't mind that kind of thing. But it was so much higher learning that I was having a hard time really grasping what was going on and what they were even talking about. So yeah, I went in thinking this was going to be great, and the first half of it was fine, and then we got into the second half and I automatically didn't like a lot of stuff that was going on. So yeah, this one was a disappointment, and honestly, most of these books have either been on hold or are going to be on hold, and this is definitely one of them. The next one is one that I'm actually going to keep hold of, and that is The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. This one is a decent book itself. I think I ended up giving it like 3.5 or 4 stars. My issue with it being a disappointment is that I feel like the plot and the title is misleading. So this book follows all the main characters from the Jane Austen novels. They're all meeting together for one reason or another at a house party that is thrown by Emma and Mr. Knightley, who is the main couple in Emma by Jane Austen. And Mr. Wickham shows up, who is the antagonist of Pride and Prejudice, and he somehow knows everyone there, and for one reason or another, and at this house party he ends up dead. And so they're determined to figure out who it is. There are two younger people here, the son of Lizzie and Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, as well as the daughter from the main couple in Northanger Abbey, and they are the youngest ones there, and so they take it upon themselves to search and figure out kind of what happened. What I did like about this book is that you kind of get a look into the next step beyond the happily ever after of all these couples. Of some of them may have lived happily ever after, some of them may not have lived happily ever after, and that conversation of like a very realistic what now. But the whole story stems from the fact that there are these two people searching for the murderer of Mr. Wickham, and it's almost forgotten for a lot of this book. It's what starts the story, and then about halfway through the big like middle section is just very character development wise, which I usually don't like. I didn't mind too much because I like those characters, but as far as it being a murder mystery, it's kind of forgotten there in the middle, and then it's picked up at the very end of like, right, this is the reason we're all here, we should probably wrap this up. And so I'm not a very good, let's say, detective as like a reader who was trying to pick up all the clues, so there might have been stuff that I missed, but overall I wanted this to be like a really fun murder mystery, and the murder mystery aspects were like almost forgotten through most of it. So I liked it, I'm gonna hold on to it, but as far as what I bought it for, it was kind of a disappointment. The next one is one that I'm still debating on, and that is Poison by Sarah Pinborough. This is kind of a reimagining of Snow White. This is the first in a trilogy that all takes a different look at one of the fairy tales. We have Snow White, I believe we have Sleeping Beauty, and like maybe Cinderella. This was the first one, so I picked it up, and I was expecting it to be more of a like, you're from the villain's perspective, and like maybe Snow White isn't the person she's been told to be, because it does like lend itself well to the back. I say like, is Snow White innocent? Is Prince Charming a hero? That kind of thing. So there does have that question, but my biggest thing was, I don't know what happened at the end. I read the book, and I'm still unsure what the purpose of the end of this book was. It's very confusing. I feel like the author was trying to create a point with what she was doing, but it didn't make sense to me. And the evil villains were the evil villains, and you weren't really like, given a reason to believe them over Snow White. Like, Snow White didn't seem like she was that bad. The Wicked Queen felt like she was bad, and like you got a lot of justification for some of the stuff that she did, but she still like was very black and white. And so I think the author was trying to lean towards maybe a Prince Charming being not such a great person, but none of the actions really showed that. So I don't know what she was trying to do, but whatever she was trying to do failed miserably, and I'm still not quite sure what happened in this book. So they're real short, they're good for readathons. I'm interested to see if it was just this story and that didn't work for me, which is why I'm holding on to this one as well as the other two in the series. I like to give at least one more a chance before I say no to it, because it could be something that I actually really do enjoy, and it was just that this one specifically didn't work for me. But whatever she was trying to showcase in this book, she did not do a very good job of it, and I was so confused for a lot of it. The next one I read for an office romance themed vlog that I was doing, and that is I Love You, I Hate You, and this is by Elizabeth Davis. This was I read 3 books in that vlog, and this was the middle book that I read. It follows our main 2 characters, Victoria and Owen, who are bitter rivals. They're both lawyers in one aspect or another, and they're bitter rivals when it comes to the courtroom, yet they are personifying a different kind of character online, and they actually have become really close friends. And so it's that conversation of like, am I drawn to this person I hate? That kind of thing. It's been a while since I've read this one, and I'm not sure if it suffered because I read a couple of really good books around it, so it itself suffered, but the romance felt very not fleshed out. I was really expecting kind of like the Hating Game vibes. That's what I was going for. I love the Hating Game so much. I wanted some more office romances like that, and this necessarily wasn't an office romance, but it did have that like we're working together vibe, and there was just so much I felt like that could have been done with this story, because this had all of the pieces that could have been a really, really incredible romance, and it just fell flat. Like, I didn't really care about the characters. I could have cared less if they got together, and that's like not the point of the romance. You want the characters to get together. You want the reader to want the characters to get together, and I was like indifferent either way. So I don't know, maybe it suffered from what I read around it, but like it itself was like, I just wanted to be done with it when I was reading. The sun has decided that it is going to come out for the rest of this video. The next one is actually a picture book, and I'm gonna probably butcher the names, I always get confused. It's The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, I think. It's one that's been circling for quite a while because there's a lot of really good quotes within this book that resonate with a lot of adults, and it didn't resonate with me. There were some really good quotes, like there was a few things where I was like, oh yeah, I can see why someone would like it. And when I was done, I could totally see why people would really enjoy this book. But I need a plot when I read. Even if it's a really small baby plot, I need there to be some plot. And these four people, this boy and these animals, were basically just like walking through the forest, and it didn't make sense why he randomly had all these animals. It didn't make sense why he was walking through the forest. It didn't make sense to me why they were having these really deep conversations when it felt like they were coming out of nowhere. So I don't know, it just kind of, it fell flat. It fell flat is the best way I can describe it, because I was so confused as to why we were doing what we were doing. Again, as I'm reading, I really understood why people really resonated with it, especially some of the conversations they had were really good conversations. And if it was presented in like maybe a comic book style, where it's like small, short conversations between these characters, and the whole point of it is just these conversations, then that makes sense. But it's presented in a picture book format, which in theory is made for kids, and so it had some really deep topics that kids are probably not going to fully understand, and kids are going to want to plot. They're not going to just want to be like, oh, they're walking through the forest talking. Great. That's going to be really boring to younger readers. So if this is marketed as a picture book for adults, then great, but I don't believe it is. And so that's why I was really confused and really disappointed, as I had heard so much hype about it. I expected to cry during it because I'd seen some people read this book and like start sobbing. And I was like, yeah, there were some really impactful conversations, but what was the point of them, you know? So yeah, that one was a sad disappointment for me. The next one is one that I'm sure would not surprise anyone, and that is the 5th volume of Dreaming Sun. I'm saying this one specifically because this is where the plot in this story turned from really good to things I didn't like. So this is a series that I rip about a lot because I read the first few volumes and absolutely fell in love, and so I went out and bought all 10 volumes and have been making my way through them. And the first half of the series is really, really good. It follows our main character, Shamana, and she has decided that she's running away from home. She has recently gotten a new sister. Her dad remarried, and her dad and her stepmom have a new kid. I don't know if it's a son or daughter, but a new kid, and she feels like she's not getting a lot of attention and no one's really paying attention to her. So she decides to run away, and in doing so, she runs across this man in the park who basically is a landlord and owns a house where he's been renting out some rooms really, really cheap, and she discovers that the other 2 people who live in this house are boys from her high school, and so, or like the equivalent of high school, and she decides that she's going to live there, and it's really found family. It's very much like her trying to figure out who she is. He's got some stipulations of like have a dream, fall in love, stuff like that, and like that's, you have to have a dream to live in this house, so that he's not like, it's basically very, it sounds creepy, but it's very nurturing in a way of him having these kids have to like not give up on what they want out of life. And so it's actually quite sweet, and I love Shamana as a character. She's adorable and naive and like sometimes really annoying, but in like a very, oh, there, I want to give you a hug kind of way. In this volume, it turns throughout the rest of the series, Shamana is trying to figure out who she's falling in love with, and she changes who she falls in love with. It feels like almost every volume near the beginning, so it's a lot. I have to kind of go in with some disbelief before, like, kind of just, like, set some boundaries, but it's in a way that, like, I could look past. With this one, the person that she starts to fall for is relatively older than her and is a very inappropriate relationship, and also, at least at the beginning, not one that's reciprocated, and she's like, it's okay, I'll wait for you forever, and he basically is like, sure, okay, wait around until I have feelings for you, and like everything about that is wrong in my head. And so I didn't like the relationship. I didn't like how this guy, who was supposed to be really sweet and has been really sweet in the past few volumes, all of a sudden was not so sweet to her. And so like this is where it all started. This was the first book that I gave 3 stars to in the series. The rest of them either got 4 or 5. Most of them got 5. And so this was a disappointment because it took the series in a turn I didn't like. And I could rant forever about it, but I won't. So this is, yeah, I picked this one specifically to like represent this one and like the few that came after it. But this is where I think it started. The next one is another one that I don't own. But I read it randomly with my friend Taylor, and that is A Rogue by Any Other Name. This is one that Taylor and I have very, very similar opinions when it comes, well, to most reading, but specifically to romances and historical romances, and she thought the meet cute in this was so good that I was like, sure, of course, I would love to read that. That sounds awesome. And the meet cute was the best part of this book. The idea behind this series is that it's a quartet, and it follows these 4 guys who own a secret club in Victorian England of sorts. It's a gambling club. I believe there are some like illicit sexual activities that happen at this club, but like the whole point of it is it's kind of a gambling place where people can go to get away. And this follows one of the guys who owns this club, and he and this girl, she inherits his land, or the land that he wants is tied to her dowry, and hopes to like get her married off, and so he marries her for the land. And we're childhood friends at one point, but he just does not treat her well. He like, it all stems from the fact that he's afraid to fall in love and he doesn't want to have feelings towards her, but he doesn't treat her in the best way, and he even gets called out by some of these friends who own this gambling, whatever you want to call it. So it's sad because like there are some very cute moments here, but this was a disappointment because it started off so good. Like I said, the meet cute between the 2 of them, adorable. And at first they didn't even recognize each other, and then eventually they do recognize each other. But it's so cute. It's so cute. And then it just goes downhill so fast. And it was sad. It was a sad book. I really didn't like the main character. The main female lead was great, but the main guy, I take him or leave him. So, yeah, that one didn't work. The next one is actually the very first book in the Mallory series, which is Love Only Once by Joanna Lindsey. This book, I think I ended up giving 3 stars to. I don't know if this suffered from the fact that the very first book I read in the series was the second one. So what happened in here was spoiled for me, because the second book still to this day is my favorite book in the series. I've read the first 6 by this point, and still the second one's my favorite, and it's the very first book that I read. And I don't know what it was. I read that one and it was just so good that I was like, oh, it's great. I'm going to go back and I'm going to continue to fall in love with these characters. And I have never fallen for any of them, honestly. Like I could take or leave most of them. And this one suffered from that. And I don't know if it was just because it was very like middle of the road. I didn't have a lot of thoughts on it. It was just kind of like bleh. But the second one was so good. I had so many high hopes for it, and it just like went downhill immediately after reading the first one. So I don't know if it just suffered because it was the first in the series and she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do with the Mallorys, and then by the time she got to the second book she had a good idea. But yeah, this one was real sad and disappointment, and I think it's entirely because I read the other one first. The next one is another graphic novel series that I have somehow, I guess, officially gotten rid of because I couldn't find it in my unhaul pile downstairs, and that is Wotakoi. And this is the first few volumes, I want to say, I think there's 2 volumes in here, of a manga series. And it's been a while since I read it, so I don't remember a lot of what goes on in here, but it's basically this girl who's a giant nerd and she likes to play, I believe it's play video games. The name Wotakoi is something in, I can't remember what language it is, but it's a phrase that basically refers to someone who's really into something nerdy. Specifically, in this case, I think it refers to video games, but there's different types of people who are into different types of things, video games, anime, mangas, stuff like that, and that's considered really nerdy. So at work, she kind of hides this away. She doesn't really let anyone know, and all of her past relationships have not worked because every time this conversation comes up, because she does eventually tell everyone she's dated, they all like get freaked out and like walk away. And like, first off, I know this is coming from a Western lens, but like the idea of someone freaking out so much because someone really is into a fandom or like a nerdy activity, which I feel like is very different here. Like that's very everyone has their own thing. The fact that someone, and multiple someones, would see this person and then the minute they find out go, oh god, no, I can't be with that, and like leave her is a ridiculous concept in my head anyway. But the book, like the series really starts when she starts working with this guy that I think she used to know from her childhood. And he's also a giant nerd. He also is considered a Wataki. I never know how to pronounce it. So there's not really a good reason why they're doing this. Like, it is a fake dating relationship that starts to turn towards real feelings. But a lot of this I couldn't get behind, and I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's just being from a Western lens. Some of the stuff felt a little too ridiculous to me. And I will admit that a lot of mangas, I kind of have to do like a, you know, disbelief. You kind of have to expand your disbelief when it comes to certain things, but this one just felt like a little too much, and I was even like, okay, even with disbanded belief, this feels ridiculous. So yeah, and I did read the first 2 volumes because it was bound up, so I gave it a good chance. I was waiting for that romance to kick in, because that's usually what'll get me through things that are what I would consider a little more ridiculous, and it didn't work. I just was like, this is boring, and I just want to be done with it. So yeah, that one was sad too. So there's actually only 9. I forgot that one of the books on this list was a DNF, but I just didn't want to talk about any DNFs in this video because I didn't actually finish those books. So there's only 9, which is not terrible. I'll take that. But those are the books that I would consider disappointments from this past year. As I mentioned, in the next video, we'll talk about surprises from the past year, so much more happy, uplifting video. But please let me know if there are any books that you read this past year that just really didn't work for you that you would consider disappointments, or if you have any books that you outright hated, let me know those as well. But if you liked this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!